Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Airspeed's Avatar Rewatch video. This one's going to be for Book 3, Fire, Episode 8, The Puppetmaster. Doing this one again, audio only, because of, again, kind of lighting conditions at the time I'm recording this. But, yeah, let's get into this one. It's a very, very interesting and unique episode, and I suppose when I'm recording this video, the timing's also pretty good, and that we're obviously coming up to Halloween. This episode aired in or around Halloween, and it's a very kind of fitting, kind of more horror-themed episode with, like, mystery, a lot of creepiness. It's one of the few episodes that definitely has, like, a kind of creepy factor to it, for sure. And the other thing, obviously, is that this episode is the introduction of bloodbending. And it's something that becomes very important in that it basically sets up the entire plot of, like, Korra Book 1. As well as, obviously, it's used a few more times as the kind of series progresses. And I think just in general, bloodbending has always, I think, by the fandom been received as, like, one of the most unique bending abilities that we ever see. Because it is such a cool concept. Like, yeah, people have water in them. Waterbenders can bend water. What's to stop them doing that? So instead what they do is they basically say it's a special ability. You can only do it when the full moon is out and a waterbender is at their most powerful. So immediately making it exclusive stops it from being this, like, absolutely all-powerful ability, which then makes, obviously, the likes of Yakone, Tarlok and Noatok so powerful because they don't have that limit because they're so powerful. Just great kind of world building in terms of a special bending technique for water. And just in general, a really good Katara episode because she really is the one who gets all the focus and kind of limelight here in terms of ultimately coming out of this in a very unique position in that she learns bloodbending. She also learns a couple of different techniques from Hama that kind of more represent the southern style of waterbending and what differentiates it from northern style waterbending. So effectively, Katara, as of the end of this episode, more or less has kind of experience with waterbending from, like, every kind of aspect of waterbending that there actually is. She fundamentally knows northern style and is a master of it. She now has the southern kind of style into it as well. And then she obviously has experienced some time with the swamp benders, so knows about their style, and just, in general, through pure experience, has so much experience just using waterbending in kind of unique ways with sweat. And then here she learns the kind of not just controlling water in plants to kind of move plants around, but to actually suck the water out. It just means that, like, she is a very, very complete waterbender by the end of this episode. But I love how they play Katara using bloodbending at the end, that it is this dark kind of moment. It is this kind of sad moment that she didn't want to ever use this technique because it goes against what she kind of believes in, and she doesn't like to use a technique like that. And so what it does is it immediately sets up the idea of, like, if she uses the ability again, what does that, like, mean? Like, when she uses it again, that means that she's kind of having this dark moment where she's not acting herself. She's kind of letting her emotions get ahead of her, which is obviously exactly what happens in 316. And it's in part what makes that such a good episode, that you have that amazing moment where she uses bloodbending, and you see, like, Zuko react to it like, whoa, like, this is incredible, the fact that you can control people like this. And just getting, like, the history of bloodbending here, the fact that Hama obviously invented it while in prison in the Fire Nation, and just how she experimented on, like, rats and animals and then moved on to humans, and basically just her whole story is so interesting. It's part of what makes this such a, like, dark, unique and interesting episode, because it's filled with mystery, which isn't often, like, the main kind of theme of, like, Avatar seasons, in that we basically have this episode and then, like, book 1 of Korra is a very kind of mystery kind of themed book with Amon and how unique he is. But beyond that, the rest of the seasons, like, don't kind of have this sort of a feel to it. So it's always nice to get a little look at that kind of style of things, and just immediately just them arriving at this town and them finding out that villagers are going missing. There's something wrong here. You see the rest of the group, as Katara is kind of learning from Hama, are kind of investigating the disappearances, and they kind of begin to find out that, like, okay, the one person who wasn't captured but was basically on the verge of being captured basically says that they were possessed and kind of dragged towards the mountain. And then the whole episode, Toph is sensing people under the mountain, and she's hearing things that they're saying as well. And by the end, it just all comes together and clicks that it's Hama. She's a waterbender, she's doing something to control people and locking them under the mountain. And it's so interesting how they managed to do her, in that she's absolutely a villain. She's a Water Tribe villain. And Water Tribe in this entire series has been like the most kind of good nation. Like, we've had people in the Earth Kingdom who haven't been the best. We've maybe even had some waterbenders who maybe characters like Han, who are just, not being evil, but just are not the most nice people. But for the most part, the Water Tribe people have been just like, they've all been like on the good side of things. So to have a Water Tribe villain like this, and just present just like she opposes all Fire Nation people, and she wants to take revenge against everyone. It speaks to just, again, the whole kind of Jet dynamic of her revenge really being against the Fire Nation military, but she's taking it out on like the citizens of this small town who realistically had no involvement in what happened. And the only reason they're suffering here is because they're from the nation that did capture Hama. So it's understandable to a degree in that Hama would want to take revenge, because, you know, she was captured with all the other waterbenders, and she's the only one who kind of survived the ordeal. And that was because she has to invent this technique to escape herself. So just because of the tragedy that she suffered, it's understandable, but you also are completely aware that she's kind of in the wrong, in the same way that we could be aware of that with the likes of Jet and so on, of it is not the right decision to take this out on just, basically innocent citizens of the Fire Nation who are almost suffering just as much as the other people, because of how at times the Fire Nation treats some of their own citizens from the more isolated areas of the Fire Nation. And I like that Team Avatar immediately kind of make that decision to, go against her and side with the villagers, that there's no debate whatsoever, really, that it's just they have to take her out. And obviously how it comes about is obviously during Hama attempting to teach Katara bloodbending, to basically, like, in her mind, and it speaks to, I suppose, how potentially, like, crazy she's going to become over time, she actually thinks that Katara will willingly, like, basically take on her role when she's gone, that Katara will just start to be the one that starts abducting people from the Fire Nation and doing what she did, continuing on her revenge, basically. And just the fact that she thinks that, it's such a interesting villain motivation of, like, she honestly wants to pass on the Southern, style. She wants that to continue. That's the one, I suppose, positive aspect of this. But it's ultimately to, like, just take this revenge of, like, so the Fire Nation know that they're being, like, taken out by a Southern waterbender, and that intent is obviously very wrong in terms of what she's trying to do. But the fight scene is so well done, of, like, Katara obviously opposes her and goes to obviously take up a fighting stance, but immediately Hama bloodbends Katara. But Katara is able to break out of it because Katara is just the more powerful bender. I really like that moment. It's such a strong Katara moment of her just kind of, absorbing water from, like, the grass below her, and basically saying, like, you're not the only one who draws power from the moon. My bending is stronger than yours. And she just, after a bit of a redirect battle, she just delivers a really powerful blow to Hama, and it's only, Aang and Sokka arriving on the scene that give Hama any sort of chance in the fight. It's why ultimately you have to put Hama down, even though she's powerful when the moon is out. You can't really place her too high in the most powerful waterbenders of all time list, as we know her. There was probably a time early-ish after she escaped, when she probably was like exceptionally powerful. But as she is now and how old she is, it definitely is the impression of like the power comes purely mainly from the moon. That she only really acts when the moon is out. And as much as she can do powerful waterbending moves without it, and she could absolutely take out a lot of people, in terms of her versus the best of the best, I think that's where, you know, the issues start to come in. Her without the really heavy power moves that she has. But still, great waterbending battle, and the fact that the end of the fight comes when like Katara is basically forced to use bloodbending on Hama to basically defeat her. It's such a, you know, kind of dark ending of like Hama is kind of happy to be taken away because she knows someone can now use bloodbending, and even if she basically knows Katara won't use it, just Hama knowing that Katara has used the technique and how it kind of affects her, it makes her happy. And it's a dark ending for Hama, because here she is captured once again by people of the Fire Nation, this time for like actually doing stuff wrong, but you know she is going to live out the rest of her life, you know, in very bad conditions. And that's just, it's so sad, dark to just think about that here she is captured again, but now they know what she can do, so they just kind of, I suppose, will stay away from her when the full moon is out, and that will stop anything from happening. And it's just a weird ending for the character, that she goes back to, I suppose, the darkest moment of her life, which was being captured, being in prison, but in a way it kind of represents, like, you know, where she learned her bloodbending, and it's where she'll live out the rest of her life, in prison. And then, you know, you have some fun moments. Obviously, the Old Man Ding's story, the voice actor they got for him was really fun, in terms of just that really stereotypical old man voice, and how he told the story and acted it out. It was really well done. At the start of the episode, you had like them all telling the stories, and, you know, Sokka telling the one about the sword, but no one really being impressed. But Katara telling a really creepy story about this girl called Mimi was very, very interesting. You know, Mae Whitman can do a really creepy voice when she wants to. But I think that's most of what I wanted to talk about in this video. Obviously, you know, the idea of it being called bloodbending, they're not actually bending the blood as such, it's just the water in the body. But bloodbending is a much more just easy to say term that gets the same idea across, that like, oh, if I could bend people's blood, you know, you get the idea. People can see some of their veins on their body. It's more clear than like, oh, water across the entire body. But you know, it's still absolutely an incredible technique, and them introducing it here and then how they use it obviously later on as we go on, it's a solid Katara episode. I don't think the best Katara episode, because it fundamentally is just a kind of advancement of techniques and her learning, you know, more about the southern stuff. But I think it's a worthwhile episode because Hama's backstory basically tells us the story of those like initial raids that are the reason why like Katara is, you know, one of the last waterbenders, why there isn't many southern waterbenders, is because of these initial raids that like Hama suffered, and that's why so many of them are gone. So that's, I think, one of the other like interesting things. There's a bit of a history lesson here that I think if we didn't get Hama's backstory here, it might have been a little bit too much of a side story of an episode. But that connecting into the fact that that's like links into like Grand story, that explains where the ship comes from, which becomes an important thing, you know, in terms of the history of the South, and it's used again in the comics. That makes it kind of worthwhile. And then it just has the unique factor of just being this very thematically unique episode, with how it's like a horror episode of Avatar, with, you know, the creepiness of bloodbending as a technique, the setup of the mystery of people going missing, the Hama being this creepy old woman, almost like a witch, and some of the shots they have of her make her look super creepy. And then just the idea of like, you kind of end with the idea of like Katara now knows this like dark technique that eventually later on in her life she will assist in making sure that this technique is kind of banned, so that everyone knows that it exists and is aware of it and knows that it's something that is illegal. So that's a really cool thing, just that they introduced this one technique and it becomes this huge plot point going forward, and obviously core book 1 mainly. But yeah, that's my thoughts on the episode. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are in the episode, as well as what I had to say about it here. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.